After working a brutal 14-hour overnight shift, I arrived home at exactly 1600 a.m., only to hit the brakes midway up my driveway. An enormous yellow dumpster sat blocking my garage entrance, not beside it or close by, but directly obstructing it. I stared in shock as my exhaustion instantly transformed into fury. But the worst was yet to come. 3 bold red stickers were plastered across my garage reading, "Property of HOA, seized for community use." I blinked repeatedly, wondering if I was seeing things or had somehow entered the wrong street. But this was definitely my home, my garage, my property. Yet there stood a towering dumpster, overflowing with what appeared to be broken yoga equipment, artificial plants, and remnants of a demolished water feature. My garage, equipped with reinforced steel doors, sealed ventilation, and a red beacon crowning its roof, was about to be forcibly seized, with the HOA treating it like some abandoned storage shed. An hour passed as I documented everything with photographs, and carefully removed one notice for evidence when Karen's piercing voice cut through the morning quiet. She marched up the walkway in what looked like designer athletic wear, her face bearing the expression of someone who'd never lost a debate, regardless of the facts. Clutching her clipboard like a battle weapon, she radiated smug confidence as she lowered her aviator shades. "That eyesore has been sitting there for years, it's ugly and dangerous," she declared. "The HO voted to convert it into a community meditation space." When I tried to interject, she held up her finger as if scolding a misbehaving child. "It's already decided. Take it up with the board. Good day." With that dismissive comment, she strutted away, tossing a self-satisfied smirk over her shoulder. The garage she was targeting wasn't some hobby shed or forgotten workshop. My late father, a retired fire captain, had constructed it using grant funding and his personal savings. It was designed as a discreet secondary fire station, built and maintained with county approval. Our neighborhood sat in a wildfire-prone dry zone, with the nearest fire station 30 minutes away under ideal conditions. After years of lobbying for a station in this location, my father finally agreed to house the rapid response unit himself. When he passed, I inherited the maintenance duties and quiet coordination with emergency services. The red beacon wasn't decorative. It activated when emergency calls came through. Behind what appeared to be an ordinary garage door sat thousands of dollars worth of emergency equipment, satellite communication devices, and even a compact rescue vehicle modified for narrow suburban streets. The HOA was either completely unaware of what they were interfering with, or worse, they simply didn't care. That afternoon, I contacted the county emergency director using the private number I kept for exactly these situations. He answered immediately, and when I explained the HOA's actions, he let out a heavy sigh. "We'll alert the sheriff," he said, "but for now secure the facility. You know the procedure." I certainly did. I had to engage the security system that had been installed years earlier under county guidance. Walking to the side of the building, I accessed a locked panel concealed in the brick wall. Behind it was a biometric scanner and a switch. One thumbprint later, the red roof light blinked twice, the signal indicating the station was now in complete lockdown and under monitored surveillance. Anyone attempting unauthorized entry would trigger alarms not just locally, but at the county command center. Karen had unknowingly stepped into a minefield. Around 300 p.m. I spotted Karen conversing with a man in a reflective vest, both examining blueprints while pointing at the garage, whispering and nodding. The man appeared confused, but Karen was animated, gesticulating wildly with her ever-present clipboard. 15 minutes later, I heard someone attempting to open the garage's rear door, the one hidden from street view. I calmly walked outside to find Todd, Karen's cousin, who fancied himself a contractor and looked like he'd just emerged from a lawn chair. He was tampering with the lock. Karen said I could inspect the interior, he claimed, mentioned we might discover asbestos or faulty electrical work. I informed him that would constitute a federal crime. He scoffed and muttered something about property rights before departing, tripping over his untied shoelaces in the process. That evening I sat on my porch with black coffee, watching Karen parade around like a newly inaugurated mayor. She was informing a small group of HOA members that demolition would commence within 48 hours, and once the garage was removed, they could begin landscaping and construct a wellness pavilion. I nearly choked on my coffee. A pavilion? She wanted to bulldoze a functioning fire response station to build a gazebo, and nobody was stopping her because they were unaware of the garage's true purpose. At 10:17 p.m., the garage's red light began flashing. I was halfway through brushing my teeth when the low hum of internal generators started up. An emergency call had come in. A vehicle fire near a canyon trail 2 streets over, with the blaze reportedly spreading to surrounding brush. I rushed outside in my sleepwear and used my watch to unlock the garage. The massive steel door smoothly rolled up, revealing the red response vehicle roaring to life. Within 30 seconds it was out the door with low sirens but clear flashing lights. I guided the vehicle onto the road and radioed dispatch. While not an official firefighter, I was trained and certified for rapid deployment, as part of the agreement my father had signed with the county years ago. Neighbors peered through curtains and stared in amazement at the fire truck emerging from what they thought was a garage full of gardening supplies. The fire was extinguished in under 10 minutes thanks to our proximity. By the time the main fire unit arrived, it was already handled. They waved and gave me a thumbs up as I returned to the garage and parked the engine. The door slowly closed behind me like a curtain falling at the end of a performance. Standing on the curb with her mouth agape and phone in hand was Karen. She had recorded the entire incident, but instead of demolition evidence, she had accidentally filmed proof that she'd tried to shut down the only fire station within a 5-mile radius. As I passed her, I simply smiled and said, "You might want to update that clipboard. This station just went operational again." The morning after the fire response, the entire neighborhood was buzzing. People who had previously walked past my garage without a second thought were now slowing their pace, whispering to each other, and taking not-so-subtle photographs. A few even gave me awkward waves, the kind people offer when they realize they've misjudged you but are too proud to admit it openly. I didn't mind. For years, I had kept the substation discreet out of respect for the agreement and practical necessity, but now that Karen had stirred up the hornet's nest, the truth was gradually emerging, one stunned neighbor at a time. Even the mailman, who typically tossed my mail without acknowledgement, paused long enough to say, "So that's what that red light is for, huh?" Before continuing with a chuckle. I knew it wouldn't take long for Karen to regroup and devise a new strategy. She wasn't the type to accept defeat, especially after promising the HOA board a community project featuring a meditation center, water feature and monthly senior yoga classes. Sure enough, by noon I spotted her on the street again, this time accompanied by a man in dress pants and a white shirt that screamed official authority. Despite his Office Depot clipboard, they circled the garage like vultures, stopping frequently for him to jot down notes. From my porch I sipped water and observed. Eventually they approached. The man introduced himself as Greg, a certified building inspector conducting an emergency code audit. Karen stood behind him like a proud coach, arms crossed and grinning. I requested his credentials and after an awkward pause, he handed me a laminated card with a blurry photo and an unfamiliar company name. I went inside and made a phone call. 10 minutes later I had confirmation from the county office that no inspection order had been filed, and Greg wasn't registered with them. I returned and handed him his badge back. "This inspection is terminated," I said calmly. "If you set foot on this property again without a warrant, you'll be trespassing." Karen's expression twisted, but Greg clearly wanted no part of this escalating conflict. He mumbled something and quickly retreated, with Karen chasing him down the street, shouting about failure and betrayal. By now I had activated every layer of the garage's security system. Inside the control room was a bank of monitors, radios, encrypted tablets, and sensors that had been upgraded piece by piece over the years. My father had always believed in staying ahead of the curve, and I had maintained that tradition. The system wasn't flashy, but it was dependable. Motion detectors had already flagged Todd's earlier intrusion, and infrared had picked up another heat signature the previous night. Someone had attempted to peer through the side ventilation shaft. I secured every access point and enabled the county surveillance link. From this point forward, anything happening around the substation would be monitored in real time at the emergency control center. Still, Karen wasn't finished. That evening, as the sun disappeared behind the hills, I noticed a drone flying low near the garage roof. This wasn't a small toy. It was a larger, high-definition quadcopter with a camera mount. It buzzed around the perimeter, hovering near the red beacon before climbing higher. I followed it with binoculars and watched it vanish behind Karen's rooftop. I didn't need to guess the owner. 15 minutes later, I received a forwarded email from an HOA member containing an edited video clip of the garage with ominous background music, and a voiceover claiming an unauthorized bunker had been constructed within the community, posing a threat to property values. It concluded with a voice declaring, "We demand action before this situation explodes." Literally, it was ridiculous, but it was also dangerous. I called the sheriff, who was already aware of the growing tension. He agreed to conduct an in-person inspection. When he arrived the next morning, Karen was conveniently watering her lawn in full makeup and heels. She marched straight over and attempted to spin her version of events, claiming the garage harbored hazardous materials, that she'd been alerted by concerned citizens about strange lights and sounds, and that she was simply trying to protect the neighborhood. The sheriff listened silently, then turned to me. I led him into the garage and unlocked the secure room. He nodded at the equipment, made a few notes, and even shook my hand. When he left, he didn't say much to Karen except that tampering with federally approved emergency systems was a serious offense, and that further interference could result in arrest. Her smile cracked like glass. Things really intensified when a second fire erupted 2 days later in an abandoned lot behind the neighborhood. This time, strong winds pushed the flames toward the rear fences of 6 homes. The county fire department was already stretched thin and radioed that they'd be delayed by 20 minutes. I didn't wait. I activated the station systems and deployed our mini response truck. Neighbors watched from their yards, jaws dropped as I maneuvered the vehicle through the side gate and raced toward the smoke. Using the station's internal GPS fire map, I reached the blaze in under 4 minutes. I began dousing the grass line, creating a fire break, and soaked 2 fences to prevent ignition. A garden shed had already caught fire, but I prevented it from spreading. The full fire engine arrived as I was finishing. One firefighter jumped out and patted me on the back, saying, "You saved at least 3 homes." When I returned, the street was lined with people. Some applauded, a few shouted, "Thank you," and in the middle of it all stood Karen, now visibly nervous. As if realizing the tide was turning, I walked past her slowly, met her eyes, and said, "The community project is doing fine right where it is." That night, I received a message from a local reporter requesting an interview. Someone had leaked the OA meeting recordings where Karen discussed seizing the garage, claiming she could sell the land to fund clubhouse upgrades. Her words were quoted directly. "Nobody even knows what that garage is for. It's wasted space." She would soon discover just how wrong that statement was. The next morning, I installed a small sign next to the garage reading, "Emergency Substation 47, no blocking, no access authorized." It wasn't large or flashy, but it was official and visible. I noticed that afternoon Karen photographed it and made a phone call. I didn't know who she was calling, but judging from her pacing and increasingly red face, she wasn't getting the answer she wanted. Later, Todd returned, this time holding a smartphone like a badge, filming the garage and narrating his thoughts on how I was harboring illegal equipment. I didn't respond. I just went back inside, opened the feed on my tablet and watched as the video he was live streaming began filling with comments. Most people mocked him, a few were furious. One said, "If you try to shut down a fire station during fire season, you deserve prison." Another simply wrote, "Karen strikes again." Things were changing rapidly. The garage had evolved from a quiet operation to a flashpoint, but it wasn't just about a building anymore. It represented what it stood for. As Karen's schemes began to unravel, it was clear she wasn't going down without one more desperate attempt. I could sense it coming. I just didn't know how far she'd go next. 2 days passed without a sound from Karen, which in her case meant something sinister was brewing. I wasn't naive enough to think she'd finally seen reason. If anything, her silence was more dangerous than her shouting. I had already caught wind of hushed conversations at the mailbox, neighbors walking by the garage slower than usual, and Todd driving by 3 times in one afternoon. Something was up, and I didn't have to wait long to discover what. On the 3rd day, bright and early, a stack of papers arrived at my door, a manila envelope labeled, "Utch Special Resolution." Inside was a printed document over a dozen pages long, filled with legal jargon, photos taken from the drone, and signatures from several board members. The essence was simple and absurd. The HOA claimed the garage was a misused military installation built without community consultation, and demanded it be turned over for repurposing due to zoning violations. They included a clause stating that failure to comply would result in fines of up to $200 daily. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. The audacity wasn't even what got me. It was the blatant stupidity. There was no legal authority behind the resolution. They had no idea the garage had been grandfathered into the property years ago, under emergency services clause with the county. Not only was it protected, but attempting to change its designation without a full public hearing was an immediate breach of multiple ordinances. Still, Karen had signatures, which meant she was building momentum. People who didn't know the full story were starting to believe the edited videos, staged photos, and drone footage deliberately taken from angles that made the garage look like a fortified warehouse. I needed to act before fiction became fact in the court of public opinion. That afternoon I made an appointment with the county council. They had already been briefed by the emergency director, but now I wanted them to see everything. I brought files, maps, video logs from fire calls, and copies of the original grant papers signed by my father. When I finished, one council member leaned back and said, "This is one of the best low-budget support stations we've got. You shouldn't be fighting with your HOA. They should be funding it." I left that meeting with renewed resolve and a digital copy of a cease and desist letter signed by the county attorney, but I didn't deliver it immediately. I wanted to see how far Karen would go first. That evening, she called an emergency HOA town hall at the clubhouse. The online flyer read, "Urgent security breach meeting." I attended not to speak but to observe. She opened with a dramatic speech about threats to the neighborhood and mysterious activity from a bunker behind garage doors. She claimed she'd received anonymous tips about radio signals being transmitted, potentially interfering with airline frequencies. A few residents nodded in confusion. Then she introduced a so-called expert in infrastructure risk assessment, a man who claimed to have consulted on national security projects. He stood up and began presenting a slideshow filled with blurry images and buzzwords like tactical threat, urban exposure risk, and civilian safety hazard. I recognized him. He was a local conspiracy blogger who had once tried to sue a water company for fluoridation. I stood up and asked one question: "Can you confirm if you're a licensed engineer with the state board?" He stumbled. The room went quiet. Karen looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. I thanked him and sat down. The meeting unraveled quickly. A few residents began whispering. One woman raised her hand and asked why the so-called threat had just saved her backyard from burning down last week. Another man pointed out that if the garage really was dangerous, why hadn't the fire department shut it down years ago? Karen tried to regain control by promising that demolition would be peaceful and supervised. That's when I stood up again, this time holding up the county's cease and desist letter. "You move one nail in that garage," I said, "and you'll be dealing with more than just angry neighbors. You'll be dealing with federal infrastructure tampering. That's jail time." She grabbed the microphone and started shouting about lies and forged documents. The HOA vice president tried to take the mic from her. People began getting up and leaving. Within 10 minutes, the meeting dissolved into chaos with arguing board members and confused residents. I walked out calmly and didn't look back. I figured she'd be humiliated enough to step down. I was wrong. The next morning, a massive post appeared on the neighborhood's social media page. A video clip from a security camera showing a blurry figure carrying what appeared to be canisters into the garage. The caption read, "EXPES, proof of dangerous chemical storage." The comments exploded, some supportive, others furious, and a few demanding immediate investigation. What Karen didn't realize was that the video was mine, taken from my own surveillance system, and the person in the clip was me carrying sealed fire foam tanks used in dry brush fires, completely safe and approved. I uploaded the full, unedited video with context. The conversation turned again. People started asking why the HOA was stalking me and manipulating footage. Karen deleted the post within the hour, but she still had one play left, and it was desperate. That afternoon, the HOA sent a private towing company to inspect the garage area for obstructions. I watched from inside as a man with a clipboard and a tow truck pulled into the driveway. He walked up to the garage door, looked confused, then returned to his truck. I followed him out and asked who had called them. He said a community safety board representative claimed there was an abandoned military vehicle parked illegally, pointing to the fire response engine. I laughed and explained it was registered with the county. He nodded slowly, then shook his head. Look, I don't want trouble. I'm leaving. Tell whoever called this in that I'm not touching that thing. And he did. He backed out and left without another word. That night, I received a message from a local firefighter I knew from mutual drills. He'd heard through the grapevine that someone had filed a formal complaint against me for operating fire equipment without a license. It was anonymous, but the timing wasn't subtle. I forwarded my certification files, county clearance, and a letter from the emergency director. Within 24 hours, the complaint was marked closed and flagged as baseless. Karen had officially tried every trick she could think of: fake inspectors, drone videos, manipulated footage, false reports, even abuse of HOA funds to pursue a personal vendetta. Every time she'd failed. But then came the call I didn't expect. The fire chief himself asked to meet. He said the county wanted to reassess the garage's role. They were so impressed by how it had handled recent fires and how I had managed the chaos that they wanted to upgrade its designation. It would become a fully recognized auxiliary fire station with a permanent plaque, full equipment support, and staff access. The best part, it would come with new zoning restrictions that legally froze the land for emergency use for the next 50 years. I smiled and said, let's make it official. Because if Karen thought this was over, she was about to learn that some fires only get hotter the more you try to smother them. The meeting with the fire chief was brief but monumental. As we stood inside the garage, surrounded by the hum of equipment and the silent weight of years of preparation, he placed a small envelope in my hand. Inside was the official designation notice signed by the county commissioner. Effectively, the garage was no longer an auxiliary volunteer support unit. It was now designated Auxiliary Station 47, a fully recognized satellite fire substation under county jurisdiction. The chief walked the perimeter, took notes on upgrades, and even suggested installing an additional sensor for faster dispatch relay. Before he left, he said something that stuck with me: "You've been running this place like a pro." Time we gave it the respect it's earned. I nodded silently, knowing that behind that garage door stood not just equipment, but the legacy of my father, who'd built the original version of this station with his own hands. I thought the news would end the madness. I thought Karen would see the writing on the wall and retreat into her OA meetings with less enthusiasm and more humility. But I had underestimated her obsession with winning at any cost. The very next day, I received a notice taped to my front door. It wasn't from the county or fire department. It was from a local attorney hired by the HOA, demanding I appear at a mediation hearing on grounds of community disruption, misuse of private property, and emotional distress caused by my ongoing militarized operation. I laughed at first, assuming it was just another paper, then scare tactic. But when I examined the document closely, I noticed something new. Attached to the complaint were pages of emails between Karen and a developer named Brent Holloway. Brent was a name I hadn't heard in years, but I recognized it immediately. He had been circling the neighborhood a decade ago, offering to buy backyard space from homeowners to build a connected green belt that would eventually link to a nearby upscale housing development. His offers were generous but selective. He only targeted back-row homes with unobstructed views and large lots like mine. My father had refused outright. Apparently, Karen hadn't forgotten. The emails revealed she'd been trying to force my hand by sabotaging the garage's legal standing. If she could get it deemed a violation or ISR, it would clear the way for rezoning and sale. The garage wasn't just an inconvenience to her. It was the one thing preventing a multi-million-dollar deal. I forwarded everything to the county and attached a report outlining each of Karen's failed attempts to discredit the garage's purpose. Within a day, a city investigator contacted me to schedule an interview. He wanted to understand how deeply the HOA had been entangled in this scheme and whether public funds had been misused. I showed him the drone footage, fake inspection attempt, manipulated video post, and attempted towing incident. He listened carefully, took notes, and thanked me for my cooperation. When he left, he said the county's legal team would be evaluating possible charges against both Karen and the HOA board if they had knowingly participated in fraudulent activity. Word spread fast. A local blogger covering civic issues picked up the story and posted a thread titled "Oh, War Zone Local Volunteer Station Under Fire from HOA with Secret Agenda." It went viral within hours. Hundreds of comments poured in. Some people shared their own HOA horror stories, others demanded an investigation. A former city planner even chimed in to confirm the legality of the substation, writing that trying to demolish a registered emergency facility during fire season was not only reckless but possibly criminal. Karen stayed quiet for the next 2 days. No meetings, no posts, no clipboard patrols. But then came the final blow. A journalist from the regional news station knocked on my door one morning, asking for an interview. She said they'd received an anonymous tip along with documents showing Karen had personally funneled HOA funds to pay her head infrastructure consultant, who turned out to be her cousin's landscaping assistant. She asked if I was willing to talk. I agreed, but only on one condition: that we also discuss the reason the garage exists and the fires we'd fought from right here while people were still sleeping. The segment aired that night, featuring drone footage of the garage, footage from my body cam during the last response, old photos of my dad building the original frame, and clips from the HOA town hall where Karen had lost her composure. They ended the piece with a shot of the new county sign installed just that morning: Station 47 Community Fire Support operated under Emergency Response Authority. By the next morning, my phone was flooded with texts from neighbors. Some offered congratulations, others apologized. A few admitted they'd been unsure at first but now fully supported the garage. What struck me most was the message from Mrs. Green, a quiet elderly woman who lived 3 doors down. She wrote, Thank you for being the reason my garden is still standing. I watched you fight that fire last week, and I've never felt safer in this neighborhood. Please don't let them take that place away. But Karen wasn't done embarrassing herself. That afternoon, in a last-ditch attempt at control, she called a special HOA vote to remove me as a homeowner in bad standing with the board. She claimed my refusal to comply with community redevelopment plans violated Clause 18 of the Community Charter. The vote failed spectacularly. Only 2 people voted in favor, Karen and Todd. The rest abstained or voted no, many for the first time openly defying her. The HOA vice president even resigned on the spot, saying he wanted no part in weaponizing bylaws to attack someone protecting the community. Karen stormed out of the room and peeled out of the parking lot in her SUV. She hadn't even realized a news crew had been quietly filming the entire meeting for a follow-up segment. The story became more than a local scandal. State media picked it up as a case study in how overreach and personal vendettas can derail civic organizations. Karen's face was on every broadcast, along with her quote about demolishing the garage to build a yoga pavilion. People mocked it endlessly online. Memes flooded the internet. One of the most viral was a split screen of me in fire gear versus Karen holding a potted fern. Caption: Station 47 vs Fern Squad. I wasn't much for internet fame, but I couldn't help but laugh. The county held a public hearing to address the misuse of HOA funds and Karen's behavior. She was ordered to appear in person. Her lawyer tried to argue she was being targeted unfairly, but the evidence was overwhelming. The judge dismissed the argument and ruled that the HOA would be audited and Karen would be barred from participating in any board activities, pending the investigation's outcome. She was escorted out of the hearing by a security officer, while trying to shout about homeowners' rights and community vision. That night, I stood in the driveway looking at the garage. The red beacon blinked softly in the dusk, a symbol of quiet readiness. It hadn't changed, but everything around it had. People now knew what it was, why it was there, and who had been trying to destroy it. The garage stood stronger than ever, not because it was built of steel and concrete, but because it had become more than a building. It had become a line in the sand. Stand for reason against ignorance, for service over ego, for community over control. And it wasn't going anywhere, not now, not ever. The public hearing had barely ended when a ripple of change began moving through the entire neighborhood. It was like someone had lifted a fog that had blanketed the community for too long. Neighbors who had once avoided eye contact now greeted me with nods, some with full smiles. One man who'd previously voted on Karen's side came by with a homemade pie and awkwardly apologized for ever doubting me. I accepted it with a simple thank you, and we stood there in silence for a moment, the air between us finally clear. The red beacon atop the garage blinked quietly as dust settled in, and for the first time in weeks, it felt like I could breathe again. But it wasn't over yet, not completely. There was still fallout to manage. The county audit had begun digging through years of HOA financial records. What started as an inquiry into misuse of funds turned into something far bigger. They discovered payments made to shell companies that didn't exist beyond a P.O. box, payments for services never rendered, and checks signed off by Karen without secondary approval from the board. The auditor's office confirmed that tens of thousands in HOA dues had essentially been funneled into vanity projects or routed through personal contacts who had zero business qualifications. When the news broke, it sent shockwaves through the community. Residents began demanding refunds, some even filed small claims. The HOA board, what remained of it, issued a public statement distancing themselves from Karen and agreed to a full reformation vote. Karen's name was stripped from every record she once dominated. Despite the official designation of the garage as Station 47 and all the legal reinforcement behind it, I wasn't taking any more chances. I upgraded every lock, reinforced the perimeter sensors, and installed a second relay connection to county emergency dispatch. I also had a new steel sign installed out front, this time larger and impossible to miss. It read, Station 47 County Auxiliary Fire Response, Federal Access Only, violators will be prosecuted. It gleamed in the sunlight, a final nail in the coffin for anyone still foolish enough to test it. Yet the most satisfying part wasn't the sign or the paperwork or even the community recognition. It came a week later when a flatbed truck pulled into the neighborhood carrying a surprise, a gift from the county fire department. The engine on the trailer wasn't new, it had seen years of service, but it had been retrofitted with the latest tools, hoses, tanks, and GPS tracking systems. It was now officially assigned to Station 47 and registered under County Emergency Services. The fire chief showed up with a small crowd of firefighters, all clapping and cheering as the vehicle was unloaded into the garage. One of them handed me a fire department patch with the number 47 stitched in bold red across the center. It wasn't ceremonial, it was active. It meant I wasn't just running a garage with some equipment anymore. I was now a licensed operator of a live substation, the first of its kind in the county, run out of private property but fully sanctioned. I didn't say much during the handover, just shook hands, nodded, and stood beside that engine for a long time, feeling my father's legacy settle into place like the final piece of a puzzle. News cameras caught every moment, and right on cue, Karen decided to make one last pathetic move. She showed up during the tail end of the engine's arrival, standing across the street with her arms crossed and her jaw clenched so tightly I thought she might bite through her own clipboard. She didn't say a word, just glared. Maybe she was still hoping to salvage her image. Maybe she thought if she waited long enough, people would forget what she had tried to do. But the damage was done and everyone knew it. Even Todd, who'd once strutted around like her enforcer, now avoided her completely. He'd been quiet ever since the HOA began discussing potential civil charges for those who had knowingly helped her mislead residents. That evening, the final HOA meeting under the old leadership took place. The community center was packed with more attendees than I'd ever seen. Karen was noticeably absent, having been formally suspended from all HOA activities pending legal review. The remaining board members, trying to restore order, announced a complete overhaul of the bylaws: no more arbitrary fines, no more secret votes, no more weaponized clauses. Every decision moving forward would require full transparency, proper documentation, and community approval. Several new nominees stepped forward for election, including 2 residents who had initially supported Karen, but later switched sides after learning the truth. I didn't run for anything. I just sat in the back, watched the process unfold, and felt a quiet sense of victory that didn't require applause. A few days later, I found a small package on my doorstep. Inside was a handwritten note and a plaque. The note read simply, "To the man who stood his ground and saved us all from losing something more valuable than we realized. Thank you," signed. The plaque had a photo of Station 47 engraved on it with the words, "Community Shield, Local Hero." I smiled, ran my hand across the cool metal, and hung it just inside the garage door where it caught the light every morning when I opened the station. Life settled into a new rhythm. Fires didn't stop, but we were now better prepared than ever. Every time a call came in, the system activated smoothly. I responded quickly and efficiently, no longer worrying about someone blocking my driveway or trying to sabotage the equipment. The community backed me now. They trusted the station, they believed in what it stood for, and that changed everything. Kids would ride their bikes past and wave. A couple of teenagers even asked if they could volunteer someday. One night, a local high school teacher stopped by to ask if she could bring a class to learn about fire safety and community service. I said yes without hesitation. But perhaps the most unexpected moment came 3 weeks after the plaque arrived. A soft knock on my door one Sunday morning caught me off guard. I opened it to find Karen standing there, without makeup, without sunglasses, and without her usual armor of pride. She held a sealed envelope and said nothing for a moment. Then she finally spoke. "I was wrong about everything." I didn't reply. She nodded once, placed the envelope on the porch, and walked away. I waited until she was gone before opening it. Inside was a check made out to the local fire department's volunteer program with a donation in my name. No note, no explanation, just the payment. I didn't know if it was guilt, strategy, or genuine remorse, and honestly I didn't care. What mattered was what came next, not what came before. That night as I stood in the garage, the red beacon flickered to life again. A small brush fire had started near the East Ridge, and we were the first to respond. I pulled on my gear, fired up the engine, and rolled out with precision. As I turned onto the main road, I saw lights turning on in homes all around me. People were watching, but this time not in fear or confusion. They were watching with trust. Station 47 had become more than a structure. It was a symbol, a reminder that one person standing their ground can defend an entire community from not just flames, but from ignorance, arrogance, and corruption. And as I disappeared into the night with sirens low and purpose high, I knew this story was no longer about Karen, the HOA, or even me. It was about